take those on one at a time is my general orientation, because dilution is the playbook of losers.
Welcome to the Measure Success podcast, where we talk with top leaders about effective strategies that inspire success. Thank you so much for making this podcast the fourth best strategic planning podcast out there. Very grateful for that. Number two, we have our workshops, as you've been hearing about. We encourage you to look on 40strategy.com for the next available 40 growth shop. We only have 40 business owners come to this event for real, authentic knowledge and actually getting to meet with these experts that come to these events, to have one-on-one meetings with them as well. So to learn more about that, go to 40strategy.com. Really excited to have with us John Rossman. We found out we have more common connections than I knew even heading into this, as he did his research, which I really appreciated. He is a very well-known business strategist, author, consultant, keynote speaker, and he has been a part of he's been managing partner at Rossman Partners. That's his core thing that he does. He advises Fortune 500 companies and startups and leadership, strategy, et cetera. Executive at Amazon, where he really learned a lot of good stuff. And you were there during, well, you could argue Amazon had a lot of heydays, in terms of it's amazing. Like each micro business can be its own incredible story itself. He's had some great books, Amazon Way, Amazon 14 Leadership Principles, which is golden, the Amazon Way on IT, Think Like Amazon, and most recently his book, which we'll talk about today, The Big Bet Leadership. John, welcome to Measure Success Podcast.
Carl, great to be here. Nice to get to know you.
Absolutely. So let's, once again, I will say a small thing, and John was very kind enough. We actually moved up. This, of course, this is not recorded live. I'm wearing my Rutgers gear today because on the screen right next to me, my daughter is getting ready to play a game against Michigan State. I couldn't be there for this particular trip. My wife is there. And so I'll be rooting along quietly, and hopefully we'll have good success with that. Regardless of that,
you got to give us an update if there's an update during this discussion.
If there's a big, we will. If there's a big score, we'll say something. But with that, John, so you have been a part of some, really part of the growth story of Amazon. I've, being, of course, living in the Northwest myself, my brother-in-law has worked there. Trent Gillespie is one of the people we know and are connected with, has been at Amazon. So many people have learned so much. My last guest was a Amazon guy as well that we just had and recorded earlier today on the podcast. So why did you write this most recent book? What was the catalyst behind it?
Yeah. So in 2018, Kevin McCaffrey, who ran strategy at T-Mobile, read The Amazon Way on IoT and reached out to me and said, "Hey, we're thinking about some stuff up here at T-Mobile." At that point, we were full-time down in Southern California. So ironically, I flew up to Bellevue, Washington, which is where I'm at now. And what Kevin's mission was, he needed to stand up a new business incubation practice at T-Mobile. T-Mobile, big company, big brand, but a pretty simplistic business model and everything, right? Like they kind of sell dumb pipe. They market and sell dumb pipe. And what they needed to do was to think, how do we ideate new businesses beyond it? And so I got to be the senior innovation advisor at T-Mobile for 3 years. And we stripped down to kind of bare metal all the little things that we did at Amazon and a few other places to build not just a process for how to think through and test and scale and justify and kill ideas, but like the culture kind of behind it, right? Because it's a different operating mode than most really good operating models have, and leadership teams have. And so when the pandemic hit and I was kind of thinking about like, God, what's the next great story? I was reflecting on like this notion of like high ambition, but high risk scenarios. And I remembered this framing that I did a ton of work at the Gates Foundation when I was a partner at Alvarez Marcel, and they talked about big bets. I was like, big bets really captures the essence of these things because they have ambition, but they have calculated risk to them too. And so big bet leadership, your transformation playbook for winning in the hyper digital era, is specifically written for senior leaders about how to do the job of leading these high ambition but high risk scenarios. Now, these things have a horrible track record, right? Like whether you call it a digital transformation or an AI strategy or an acquisition or an operating model redo. All of these things tend to follow a pretty similar pattern of well over an 80% failure rate. And failure is a, tricky term. Really, it's even higher than that when you put in ROI on top of it, right? Like one expert, Bert Flyberg, has 0.5% of large initiatives are on time, on budget, and on ambition. And it's that on ambition piece that is the easiest thing for teams to let go of. So on one hand, these things have a horrible, horrible track record, but on the other hand, you have to do them, right? Like it is the only proven way of taking a company from whatever performance quadrant you're at and to raise the quadrant is through bold moves. So that's a wicked problem right there, right? On one hand, the vast majority are going to fail. On the other hand, you have to do them. So we wrote the book that we wish we had at T-Mobile, which is, what is the leadership job? Not all the tactical teams in the ring, but what's the leadership job in how you actually lead these transformations? Because the premise of the book is like, if you think you need these things now, wait. And so we frame it with kind of this concept of the hyper digital era, which is essentially that we are heading into an era where not just technology and AI, but how our population dynamics, how the indebtedness of our country is going to lead, and the aggressive capital behind investors are going to lead to this super cyclone of forces where companies that can master the playbook of how do I actually change, how do I transform, are going to rule the day. And those that can only be good operators are going to suffer the consequences of it. And so that's why we wrote the book, is to give a tactical, fairly holistic playbook for senior leaders to do that job.
You are speaking my love language. I love this discussion, especially of what we have today. The dynamics, I agree, everything what you're saying about AI. Let me just tell you just a small little thing.
Yeah.
One of my most interesting earlier podcasts we had was with Mr. Jacob. He's one of the founders of the Paul Allen Institute, where they have $200 million a year that going into AI. This is way before ChatGPT had been launched, but it was right when we recorded it, right when ChatGPT came out. And I remember I was asking questions, and he kept on saying, "I think you meant to ask." Right. Like, he's so brilliant in terms of his knowledge and where, but he said, you don't understand how significant the democratization of GPT is, right? It's bigger than anything we've ever seen before, bigger than even the internet coming out. This is transformational. And it's funny, just these little things. 2 years ago, you barely knew anybody that even went into GPT. I am now hearing conversations, forgive me on this, but an elderly lady walking by and telling her, this chat GPT thing is so fun. Like, nobody would have dreamed that 2 years ago. So clearly.
And the other interesting part of that story is, think about 2 years ago in Google, right? So Kevin went on from leading strategy at T-Mobile to leading strategy in the Google ads business. But 2 years ago, the only business problem Google had was government interference, right? Like, it was, the government was like, you're a monopoly, and so they were very careful about like how to keep a little semblance of competition alive, and everything. Well, guess what? In 2 years, Google's got an existential threat and change to their business. Now, they seem to be adapting extremely well, partially because they had in the background a ton of big bets that they were testing and warming up and everything, right? But it just shows how quick the world's best business model ever, right? Google ads, right? The world's best business model ever. Even that can be threatened in essentially the snap of a finger.
It's one of the most common things we're talking about, which is if you're using, for example, Google AdWords today as your primary function to get leads, where are you searching today? Most of us are not using Google anymore. We are going on to Perplexity or ChatGPT or name it, right? Yes, perhaps using Gemini, but the reality is you're using something different, which means that
even Gemini is not AdWords, right? And so, like, yeah,
Correct. Exactly. Fair
like,
enough.
yeah, that's the point. Is we've turned to an answer machine versus a link machine, and it is a different metaphor for everything. And so, yeah, it's changing everything. And we are literally like at the first veneer level of the impact on this, right? So I write a newsletter. It's called the Digital Leader Newsletter, a big bet briefing. And I talk a lot about frameworks, like how do you think through high stakes decisions. And I released one that's called Pancakes, the AI strategy. And so it kind of talks about three levels of AI strategy. First is kind of individual productivity, still a lot of juice to go there and everything, but it's kind of like a one-time sugar hit, and everything for an organization. It fundamentally doesn't change the essence of a company. It brings a productivity boost to it. The second level is workflow re-envisioning, right? And so how do you actually reinvent workflows to work with AI? There's a real art and trick and discipline to re-engineering workflows in this manner to do this well. And then the third layer is the secrets layer. Like what is the critical essence of a business that if you could solve it differently, completely unlock it, change maybe it's the cost model aspect of it, the cycle time aspect of it. For example, pharmaceutical drugs, like if you can change the cycle time on pharmaceutical drug invention, like you completely change the dynamics of their portfolio. And so that's what companies need to do, is actually think about the full length strategy and have the stomach to be able to understand that this is an experimental journey that we're on. It's not going to be highly predictable. You have to ask the right questions at the right times. And that's a big part of big bet leadership is these terms sound very similar to your operating terms and everything, but it is a fundamentally different game that you are playing. And most good leaders, really good operational leaders who grew a career from being predictable, from delivering results, from making a plan and hitting the plan, this journey we are on is fundamentally different. And if you try to apply that mindset and that set of values to it, you will force the organization to tighten up, to pucker. You can't swing a golf club or hit a baseball when you're all tight. You can't solve problems that way either, right? And so you fundamentally have to completely create a different operating model for these things that we call big bets, high ambition, high risk, high dependency, low predictability things. The key to surviving this is keeping them small until you've actually proven out the true critical risks or things that must be true to deliver this high ambition um, goal or strategy or concept that you have. And that is truly enterprise strategy with an edge of agility to it, right? Experimentation as the foremost concept that we need to get in here.
One of the things I loved, I said, and for my last guest, Ellie Portney, who also was an Amazon veteran, he said something that you said was very important, which is it's about a hypothesis. I think it's one of the best things they teach at Amazon, right? Is they teach the concept of stop thinking you know, right? You know better than I do. Stop thinking you know, come in with a hypothesis and prove out that hypothesis and continue to learn through the hypothesis. What we say with our clients is strategic plan is a hypothesis, it's not a fact, right? You just don't know until you go into the trenches and you actually start practicing and testing and validating where things are going. The part that I don't think small business, big business, medium business, and big business expected. The Netflix story is well known, right? What Reed Hastings had to do, which meaning he basically took his entire new leadership team to go from mailing CDs to being online. He took a whole new management because the old management team could not think because all their incentives were built on making money off CDs.
He had to fire his co-founder, Mark Randolph.
That's right. Completely changed everything that happened. What I don't think people realize, no matter what company you are, whether you're an HVAC company in the middle of a small town or whether you're one of the biggest companies in the world, everybody has to undergo this transformation to survive the next 5 years from now.
I agree completely with that. But even if you take kind of this AI, threat off the
Mhm.
table, and everything, right? I'm
Yeah,
in I'm in,
sure.
I'm, in, I'm an industry that for some reason isn't going to be impacted by this and everything. The concept of calculated risk taking and being better at
Mm.
high stakes decisions, that's to me is the underlying first principles we are talking about here, which is we create value by taking calculated risks, not because if we want to do things that we have full information on,
Yes.
guess
Yeah.
what? They're going to be very incremental. They're going to be very well understood. There's no game in that. There's no beta in that at all, right? So we have to take calculated risks. These things involve a higher degree of making better high stakes decisions. The best way to approach high stakes decisions is to actually think about them as a set of experiments. And you have to get so much clearer in order to do this. So there's three critical habits that big bet legends take. And so this is the
Mhm.
framework of the book
Mhm.
is they create clarity, they maintain velocity, and they accelerate risk and value. So the book is both solves those problems, gives you a strategy of how to do that, and then a set of tactics relative to that. You can change the tactics, keep the strategies because you're solving the problems that need to happen. And so a lot of the Amazon aspects of this are about how do you create that clarity through writing out the situation. That one of the killer habits, and it's just one of the things that makes Amazon Amazon, is kind of this concept of the 6-page narrative, the future press release, all the FAQs, all of that. For a team that doesn't come from that background, it's a very different way of working. So we got very prescriptive in the book about what memos to write and how to write them, and we created a bunch of offline or online material offline from the book. We offloaded it from the book about a set of templates and a GPT and a set of killer prompts to help you go through these memos. But it
Mm.
is a different way of working. But if you think that just glancing across, like, here's the concept, here's the things we have to do, like, you are either going to take on a very incremental approach to it, or you're going to start the journey to nowhere, where essentially through your building, prototyping, releasing process, you're going to be figuring out things that we could have figured out up front if we had written and debated and studied it just a little bit longer than teams tend to do.
It's so interesting. I remember years ago, somebody had a really good mentor of mine said, "Carl, he was confused. Like, you're actually a calculated risk taker." I was like, "Yeah, absolutely. I don't like to lose, right? I don't want to lose in these things." And I like it how you talk about that because the tendency of companies, right, is to their strategy isn't working, and then they'll start overspending in multiple different areas, right? And next thing they know, they're out of resources, right?
Right,
And then
right.
that management team loses their job, or they have some big issues that I'm taking. So one of the challenges I see in this calculated risk taking in any time you're trying to do strategy is when you're just off the shore of your strategy and you can't see behind you anymore. You can't see the island behind you and you can't see the island in front of you. How do you get that sense of confidence that you're still guiding in the right direction?
I'm going to answer the question I'm going to answer the question I thought I heard there and everything, right? Which is companies don't die of starvation of good ideas. They die from indigestion of too many good
Mhm.
ideas, right? And
Yeah.
so we're struggling, your setup, we're struggling. So we start flinging a lot of things, and that dilutes the precious few resources that we have, right? And resources are money, human capital, management capital to be able to do it. And so the essence of this is, how do we upfront explore a bunch of good ideas, identify the critical idea to proceed on, and then focus like hell on that thing, right? So that we don't get peanut buttered. We stay focused. The word priority is singular in nature. It is this notion of priorities is one of the worst notions that's out there. It is priority. And so having, a really good book called Essentialism, How to Keep the Main Thing is the spirit behind this and everything, which is explore a bunch of good ideas, but then you have to have the governance, the management techniques. We outline this. This is section 3 of the book about how do you decide which ones to kill, pivot, continue. But what mostly happens is the fourth option, which is confusion. We create confusion around these high stakes moments. We don't even recognize that we're in a high stake moment, but it's at that moment. And that's the process you have to set up, is kind of this filtering process. How do we bring in a bunch of good ideas, put enough thinking on them to discern them? All of these are good ideas, but that doesn't mean it's the right idea for you to proceed on, right? That's, the hardest part about strategy is saying no to good ideas.
That's right.
And then focusing, because these are not just like go execute, these are go experiment, right? And so we only have so much capacity in an organization to take on. And these things always tend to be a combination of kind of go-to-market capability, change that we have to drive in the organization, design work of process, and technology work that creates a whole nother set of big bets that have to be taken. Take those on one at a time is my general orientation, because dilution is the playbook of losers.
Wow, that's a great quote right there. I love that. Delusion is the playbook of
No,
losers.
dilution.
Delusions. Thank you. Dilution.
Yes.
Dilution.
Yeah,
Oh, thank you.
delusion is probably also, but I'm talking about dilution, right?
Yeah.
Diluting your focus. When it comes to major change, one at a time tends to be the right thing, especially for mid-size organizations. Bigger organizations, if you can kind of quarantine these things off, you can take on a few at a time. Obviously, Amazon does it, Google does it, like these big companies do it, but they truly have them sectioned off. Most companies, one thing at a time.
So I'll pull out for those who are in one of my favorite books. You're talking about the 4 disciplines of execution. I'm sure you've gone through it, but one of the classic, I love it. There was the first version and then there was the second version. The first version, they said only do 3 things at a time. And then they very quietly, after doing 5,000 implementations, they said you should only do 1 thing at a time.
That's funny. I did not know that story. That is a great reference point to this. And it doesn't mean you're not making other incremental changes, but when it comes to a transformation, right, a major change, uno mas, one at a time.
Yep. No, it's you nailed it. Is the having that one. So let's go through this a little bit more, because this is the hard stuff. It's the hard thing about hard things, right? Is actually keeping that discipline.
Well, I mentioned 3 critical habits, right? We're talking about now maintaining velocity, right? And like, think about like coming out of your annual plan. Everybody's like, yeah, we're all in, I'll give it my focus. It'll be my priority. But what quickly happens is like we get back and it just becomes another part of your normal operating process and everything, right? And so the art of this is like, how do you actually maintain that velocity? A couple of little secrets. We've got a full playbook in the book and everything is one is like, how do you assign senior leadership to lead this and empower that person to do that, right? So Amazon has this concept of a single threaded leader. Lots of companies have this concept of a DRI, a directly responsible individual. That's the term we use in Big Bet leadership. You have to have a leader that is truly focused on this, not as like one of their portfolio of things that they're doing, but it's like 90% of their orientation is towards making this thing happen. That's a hard thing to do, is to take a senior person and go, this new little idea is the thing that you are doing. That was Kevin's job at T-Mobile, and everything, right? And as Kevin has told me, he goes, there's nothing as great for your career as being associated with a big bet that works. And there's nothing quite as risky for your career as being associated with big bets that don't work. That's why we wrote this book, is for the company and the individuals that are in these things. But focus is the most controllable factor that we have on the success, or the most predictable thing that we can do. The second is policies, right? And so, most of our company policies are geared towards like a predictable business. We're trying to get, optimized for cost and quality of service. Guess what we're trying to optimize for in this playbook of transformation? Speed of experimentation. So we can predict these things are going to slow us down. And so a big part of this playbook is, how do you get in front of those things that we know are going to slow us down, and create either a fast path through it or a fast path around it, so that we do not let these things slow down. Big bet legends find ways to not just maintain velocity, but to accelerate velocity. And we accelerate velocity on the things that matter. We pull forward the truly high risk components, and we find a way to quickly and cheaply test it. Well, you can only do that if you've really thought it through up front and created those nested, not just a hypothesis, but a set of nested hypotheses, stack rank them, figure out savvy, cheap ways of testing these concepts. Here's an example. So oftentimes we always think of these risks as like a technical risk or an execution, but usually it's the market risk that is the real risk, right? And it's like, what's our cost of customer acquisition? What's our churn rate going to be? What is our pricing that we are going to demand relative to that? If you can truly isolate those things, you can find ways to interview experts who can give you not just anecdotes, but data points from market analogies that will inform your hypothesis around the economics that you need to create out of this business. And so if you truly isolate your thinking so you can isolate your hypotheses, then you can do pinpoint tests in a savvy, scrappy manner to actually de-risk these things before you decide to go all in on it. And that's the survival skill of big bet leadership.
Love this. This is absolutely fantastic. So when you're going through and people are going through, or they're asking you questions, what's typically the biggest obstacle they run into?
Paint a picture of this person for me.
Okay, so they're a CEO. They've started this process, and they're like, "Hey, I need to do this. I know I'm at my company. Our industry is a transformation right now. I need to adopt AI. We have competitors coming in. We have PE money coming in. I need to survive this."
Yep.
He gets excited. He or she gets excited about this. He gets excited. He or she gets excited about this opportunity, and then something on their own comes in. What's their biggest obstacle of like moving forward with it?
We've already talked about one, which is appointing an actual senior leader to truly make this their priority. That's a hard thing, even for big companies to do, because the coin of the realm is the size of the organization that you're running. In this case, oftentimes you strip them down to nothing, and it's like you're leading a little tiny idea, and everything. But it takes a senior person in the organization, because they're the only ones who can navigate across all their stakeholders, both internal and external, to get this big market changing concept to work. So that's one. And the second thing is like, they want predictability. Like, when am I going to see ROI on this? It's like, I can talk to you about some directional things about like when we are going to start testing and what we think the market sizing could be. But if you're in this for a highly predictable, short-term, game-changing ROI, like, okay, we gotta have a different set of tactics here. Now, there are some opportunities that I mentioned in kind of that pancakes stack of AI strategy to create some wins up front, so that you can fund and create a talk track of success around this. But the truly game-changing workflow and uncovering the secrets of your business, those things are not predictable. And anybody who tells you that they are predictable, actually, that should be a warning sign to you, because they actually don't understand the nature of driving this type of change.
I love that, how it should be a concern if they say, "I know what's going to happen next." The analogy we like to use a lot is D-Day, and how in D-Day, it was this amazing historical moment from a war perspective. But the very next day, they didn't know that hedgerows existed.
Right. Right.
Hedgerows, for those who aren't familiar, had been there for hundreds of years. People had photographs of them. People who were on the ground knew they existed. Nobody had foresaw putting Sherman tanks through these hedgerows. They were impenetrable for and so they had to completely adopt. And that's why I 100% agree that you just don't know, right? You just
Yeah,
cannot
I mean that
predict
that
these
that's the
things.
Mike Tyson quote of everybody has a plan until the first punch, right? Like that. That is when reality hits. And I think that is one of the things that I took away from Amazon was how to differentiate things that are highly predictable versus things that are not predictable, and how to understand that it's a guided wandering process that we're going on to. That's why it takes some stomach. You have to truly believe, like, okay, there's a friction point, there's a market, there's a problem to solve. But predicting how and when it's going to take to solve that, like that is a journey. You have to do it with an experimental mindset and budget it appropriately so that you can afford that journey. Big bets fail for many reasons. One is they analyze it too long. That's a failure plate, or they don't have a portfolio of big bets. The other is that they fall in love with an idea too early when it's underbaked, when it's unproven, and they go all in on it. That's also a failure mode. And so there's this fine fence line that we're trying to find of like thinking through it at pace, but at a right depth, experimenting, putting enough wood into it, but not too much that we get drained out or that the pressure for immediate results becomes too great. There's a bunch of fine fence line that you have to find. That's why these things are tricky. That's why you need a different playbook for it. That's why we wrote Big Bet Leadership, is hopefully to be your guide, to help you manage that fine path that you have to find here to be successful at this.
When you're working with your clients and going through this process, how do you measure success with them?
So in two
Oh,
ways.
please.
One is that they have a portfolio of ideas that they are convicted on and everything, and we have to have debates about which one are we going to proceed on, right? And so that's one measure of success, is that, as I said, like, companies die of indigestion, not starvation. We need to make sure they don't take on too much, but you have to have a set of ideas that are all valid, and everything. And it's really the resource allocation. Which one are we going to proceed on? So that's one measure. And the second is a long term, like changing the way they work, changing their vernacular. So they talk in terms of bets versus projects. Like a project is just like an incremental thing that you go do. A bet indicates, oh, I think this has high potential, but I don't know for sure. It has
Mm.
calculated risk to it, right? And
Mhm.
so you change the way they work. They know how to actually write memos and debate the memos, and the healthy process that brings about in a culture, so that you're viciously attacking ideas. Guess what that actually is? That's experimentation right there. But too many people are so sensitive about actually giving critical feedback that they just kind of hold back in meetings. They let things proceed even when they have concerns or ideas, because they don't want to have too difficult of a conversation up front. Like, getting along is really important, but it's actually not the most important thing. The most important thing is to solve valuable problems and to make progress. And we just have to get that calibration right. Writing these things out actually makes it easier to have these kind of, devil's advocate conversations about prove out the idea, and everything, right? So those are the types of, like, how we work measures for how I measure success at a client.
I just want to just touch on. I love when you said there, solving valuable problems is more important, right, than trying to keep a quote unquote a good relationship. Mistaken with the purposes, right?
Right.
I think that once again we sometimes forget that yes, humans matter, but yes, we want to have good relationships. Yes, those things matter, and but what's really amazing is when we could also have those challenging conversations to get to a better result, as opposed to withholding and not wanting to challenge or not want to listen, right, to different areas. So I think that's a really important concept.
And that's important even in well understood situations and everything, right? Like you have an operating problem, an operating error, or some sort of personnel problem like that. That's super important and to do. But it's even more important when we're talking about fundamentally making a calibrated risk decision about a future that is by nature undefined and high risk. So it's even more important that we can have critical conversations about like what must go right, what could go wrong, what assumptions are we making, what are the things that have to be true in order to create this ambitious future state that we are talking about. You have to be able to attack the problem, and you need to make sure that it's like if you think about I talked about portfolios, right? A portfolio, if you think about high risk versus high benefit, the quadrant you don't want to be in is the high risk low benefit quadrant of that portfolio. But concepts get funded all the time that at their essence have no juice to them, but they're highly complex. Those are the types of things you have to be able to have conversations about in proving out like that the juice is worth the squeeze here. These things take a lot of effort. We have to be the most important decision that senior leadership makes is resource allocation decisions, right? We only have so much flexible budget, time, capital that we can put to play here. Where you put that, those are high stakes decisions. And that's why I frame all of this around, this is the management science of high stakes decision making right here.
Okay, I'm curious about you. I'd like to, if you don't mind, I'd like to switch just, and we're just going to be pretty brief about this. You have done a lot of incredible things, and throughout your career, you are obviously, anytime you've worked at the companies you've been at, it's a challenge, right? And so I'm curious for you, what type of personal habits have you developed over the years to help make sure that you can still be a great leader despite all the other challenges that are going on?
My life philosophy is wrapped up in that, which is I get up early, I work out, I focus hard, I turn off all the chatter, and everything. Actually, do work. I try to focus on what matters, and then in my afternoon, I do the things that are a little less taxing, but maybe catching up with people, and things like that. So and then I turn it off, and it's like I have dinner with my family, and everything, right? I do tend to work on the weekends. That's when I actually do my bet, but I'm in a kind of the thought leadership business. And so, that's what tends to work out really well for me. And my kids are grown, so I don't have demands there and everything. And so people waste away so much time during the actual day. I am absolutely convinced based off of a career of seeing people who are absolute savages about making every moment count within an 8 to 10 hour day versus those that just bullshit the day away, and they end up they can be high performers, but it takes them 14 to 16 hours a day. So then their personal life and their balance suffers because of it. I am living testament that you can have it all. You can have fitness, you can have a family, you can do meaningful hard work. You can have it all. It takes discipline.
Yeah, it does. It does. It does. And I appreciate that. So speaking of that, so you've kind of said it there, but so then how do you measure success in your personal life?
One way I think about this type of question is like, what do I want on my tombstone? And the only thing I want on my tombstone is dad. Like honestly, like that was the thing I didn't have as much growing up. I didn't come from this nurturing, family, and everything. Like that's all I ever wanted to do was provide a positive, enthusiastic environment for my family, and I was blessed to be able to have a family and to be able to do that. And so ultimately that's what I want on my tombstone.
I love that. I love it how you put it back. And you mentioned earlier you have two of your children were, I don't know if they're sons or not, but played water polo college. I mean that's awesome. And that once again there's I love it how you've been able to do that,
All you
experience
want
that.
for your kids is that they have motivation, they are optimistic about the future and about themselves. athletics are one way to help build that and express that, but it's not the only way. And so I just feel so blessed that like I got 2 adult kids who are optimistic, enthusiastic, and independent. And that's your job, right? Like that's the job to be done, is to create a great citizen.
Yeah. Yeah. Love that. Okay. Not one of your own books, but what is the one book you're recommending to people today?
Yeah, it's a book called "Good Strategy, Bad Strategy" by Richard
Rumel?
Rumalt. We kind of modeled, we took some of his stuff and put it into Big Bet Leadership, but that book will fundamentally change the way that you think about planning and planning exercises.
Goal scored.
Oh, good. I thought you were talking about my answer. You're talking about an actual goal.
Wow, that was good. Good goal. Okay, sorry about that, folks. We this is real live stuff going on here. So all right, that makes me happy as we continue on. Once again, watching my kid here play. She didn't score the goal, but one of her teammates did, and
It's a
fantastic
team
little
sport,
play there.
man. More than anything, that sport is a team sport. So,
yep, absolutely. Okay, how can people connect and learn more about what you're doing?
LinkedIn, John Rossman is easy, or go to rossmanpartners.com or johnrossman.com. They all lead to the same place. So yeah, and you can find Big Bet Leadership at Amazon. Beautiful book, great audiobook. We wrote it to be a good listen. So yeah, we built a bunch of great tools that you get with the book to help put it into practice.
Wonderful. John, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on in the Measure Success podcast today.
Perfect. Well, thanks for having me, and great to get to know you, Carl.
Absolutely. To everyone else who's listening, we're just so grateful ourselves that we continue to have great guests like John. And I highly encourage you to read his books. What he's talking about, this Big Bet Leadership, it's legit. This is like really good, deep level. There's a lot of like what I call surface level books that are out there, but this is going down into how you actually change your behaviors to get to outcomes. And there's a playbook behind it, and you don't have to make it all up, folks. It's been done before. Now your situation is of course different, but it's been done before, and learning from some of the best, like John and his team and people that he's worked with in the past. These are true success rates. And one of the fun things that companies like Amazon have done over the years is they've continued to have this amazing success because it's not, once again, it's not luck, right? It's not luck when you continue to go through this process. So as we always like to say, wishing you the very best and measuring your success. Have a great day.